is to simply love God, to come closer to God, and understand God's presence. I often ask two things of biblical scholars or rabbis, but of anyone. What is the most common phrase in the Old Testament, in the Tanakh? Does anybody know? What would you say is the most common phrase in the Tanakh? I have a great biblical scholar on my left who may remain undercover. But basically, anybody know? Anybody want to venture out? One of them is, what's the most common phrase in the Tanakh, in the Torah? Not that would be more than new, but no. Yes, and God spoke unto. Anyone want to offer the Hebrew? But okay. But what I'm saying is that the immanence of God in our life, if God is present, did that voice which spoke to Moses go anywhere? Or have we lost the ability to listen? The whole idea of meditation is to be able to tune in. I was asked by my friend Paul to go on a radio talk show, something really new. This was, what was the name of the show?
Joey Reynolds.
The WOR late night talk show last night. And I said to Balaji before I go, what should I say? They said, tell him that God is the greatest talk show host. He broadcasts on all channels throughout the cosmos. So that But the point is that we've all forgotten how to tune in. We've lost the sense of what channel. And I don't know about you, but somebody tells me just sit quietly. Does your mind quiet down if you just sit quietly? It's strange, isn't it? The mind's still chattering. Babaji used to say it's like trying to get a racehorse who's been running, or a wild horse who's been running around all day, to come back in the corral in an instant. And that we've let our minds run wild, we're not going to get it to calm down immediately unless we give that mind something even better. And so the sense is that love of God, or that love of God's holy name, has such power and such love that voice of ours, and I often say that instead of the finite voice which is always chattering, let us learn to listen to the voice of the infinite within us. That voice which is always there to calm our fears. As a little child runs to his parents and jumps in their lap to be held and given solace when they're shaken. So that parent sits within us, and when we spend time in meditation, we're being held and reinforced and filled with love. So, and our ego, when we talk of all these spiritual concepts of attachment and other such things, it is only in that sense that there is something greater than ourselves that gives us more love and supports us in all we do. I'm going to probably just stop for a few minutes or more, and if you have any questions or anything you would like me to talk about more, I will. Because I can sit here and talk all night. Questions, what would you like to talk about? Yes. The question is, can I talk a little bit more about balancing spiritual practice, let's put it that way, and our life? I think the most important thing to understand is that who's in charge anyway? If we think we're going to, take control of God's in our life, we're wrong. It's that power which is God, and we see in all traditions the concept of submission to the will of God, or learning to sacrifice ourselves to the will of God, or even in Taoism, in a way, one is inaction, action. That whole sense is that all life is spiritual. I used to get up in the morning because I had a business that I was running. We had community projects that Joginder and I would do, and or whatever happened to be. And I would get up in the morning, and when I'm sitting in prayer, I say, okay, Mark, where do you want me to go? Which office do you want me to report to today? And so it's not something that we necessarily consciously do or consciously have to worry about. The point is it's totally integrated. It's not something, and I can only say that spiritual practice, Babaji always said, set your alarm clock a little bit earlier and punch into God's office before you go to yours. So spend a little time sitting in whatever spiritual practice you have, and then push off in the world. And as far as Babaji is concerned, that there is no such thing as getting your hands dirty as long as you're working honestly. I think what happens is when you see a world in which you have, and I don't mean corrupt from a philosophical perspective, and obviously you don't have to get too philosophical and wax too philosophical to realize that there is real corruption in the world today. So the point is that we are never, and I think we as students in the 70s were very concerned that if we step out of the campus, that we're going to be infected or affected or corrupted by the establishment. And that the establishment was this monolithic monster that somehow is going to subvert our principles. You know, Jesus was criticized by his disciples because he was hanging out with the wrong crowd sometimes. They thought it would really damage or tarnish his image. And Jesus' response was, do you think God is so weak that my going to these people is going to have an impact on God? It's rather that God, that love of God, and I can tell you wherever we go, and I think you all know this. Last night, we got back from the doctor at 3 in the morning. We were out of water. I walked across to the all-night store, and ended up 20 minutes later, my wife was getting worried. After the owner of the store who I'd met, an old Korean gentleman, we were just talking about God for 20 minutes. Yet in the taxis, on the street, we just have forgotten that we are brought together, be it in a business relationship, be it in a marriage relationship, be it in a relationship with our children, who you know are not really those souls, are not really ours. We're given custody of them by God to raise them, to shepherd them through life. But all this sense of that if we simply understand and look for that spiritual connection, suddenly what I would call that beautiful dot-to-dot, like a child's dot-to-dot puzzle, will come up. And so there is no dichotomy between that which is spiritual and the physical or material world. It's just that the material world can in no way imprint. And this is very important because our children or you have been, everything has been external, imprinting on their psyche. Everything has to be plugged in. To take the phones off, unplug the iPod for a little while. What plays inside our minds is much more powerful. And rather than having that external stuff imprinting on our minds, all that good will begin to imprint on our minds. That light will start to turn away that darkness. And wherever we go, it will start to shine. And other people will be impacted too. Does that make sense? Sorry, that's a very long answer to a short question. Anyone else? The question is, can you share some of the more profound ways or exercises in which meditation was taught? I can tell you that there are hundreds, maybe thousands of methods of meditation and spiritual practice. Babaji's was very simple. He simply told anyone who came, take this Nam and recite it, everything will take over from there. Or take Japa, this empowering hymn of praise, and read that. There were no positions, I knew nothing, and still know very little. My friend Ron bought me this wonderful book so I could be more conversant with the terms of yoga. I know nothing about it. I'm very ignorant. One of my dear friends, who's 90, was one of the first person to translate Patanjali's Yoga Sutra into Hindi from Sanskrit. And yet, everything was practical. Practical. That when people would ask, when Babaji spoke in Russian, they would ask him, do we have to give up something? And he said, how about giving up lies? How about giving up the corruption in your life? How about giving up the greed in your life? Isn't truth a difficult discipline? Holding yourself to the standard of truth was perhaps one of the most contorting disciplines that any of us have to. So he was always less concerned about any physical practice. He was concerned that the body be actively engaged in work, in productive work, and that the mind be attuned to God, and that the heart be filled with compassion and looking to help those in need, to wipe out the problems that plague the world. Those were the disciplines. There was nothing else. And it was just that he, for lack of a better term, if someone is, I put it, self-then-charged, that which he gives you, where is that love? Very powerful. Okay, I'm sorry.